Good afternoon. I am Donald Romanik, President of the Episcopal Church Foundation, and welcome to this webinar, a conversation between me and my friend and colleague, Mary Kate Wold, the President and CEO of Church Pension Group. As we know, a general convention is convening in Baltimore, smaller, shorter, more focused, and a lot of us are going to miss being together in the family reunion and visiting the CPG booth and the ECF booth. But here we are. We thought that it might be helpful to have a webinar and conversation with CPG, because CPG is an important institution in the church, and a lot of CPG issues are discussed and decided at General Convention. So we're gonna have this conversation with Mary Kate. Mary Kate, let me begin. You know that ECF works with local faith communities and lay and clergy leaders, and we have our Vital Practices website that had 80,000 users in 2021. And a lot of our constituents are people in the pews, people who are active in the congregation. But let's look at a Brenda or Jose who's on the outreach committee, is a regular attender, maybe on the altar guild, sings in the choir. Why should they be interested in the work of CPG?
Well, Donald, thank you. And before I talk about Brenda or Jose, I just want to say thank you for suggesting this. You and I spend a lot of time together and discussing the church and how we each serve the church. And so I'm really grateful to have this time to chat with you. And hopefully we'll hear a little bit about Episcopal Church Foundation in the course of the next hour as well. But it's interesting to me. I mean, I've been an Episcopalian my entire adult life, and I really didn't know anything about the Church Pension Fund, and I served on multiple vestries and such. So I would start with the assumption that Brenda and Jose don't know anything about the Church Pension Fund, and there isn't necessarily a lot of reason that they would. So maybe let me give you a little bit of history. We were founded over 100 years ago, and in the early 1900s, we opened our doors in 1917. And before that, there were the kind of haves and have-nots of clergy. There were some clergy with trust funds who came from wealthy families, and they were just fine. But most clergy did not have a lot of resources and really didn't think ahead about the time that, on their meager salaries and that they would have to retire and really have no assets to retire. So we found that back in those days, many clergy retired into really abject poverty. They relied on family and friends for a while to support them. And then after a few years, that support would dry up. And it was really a pretty desperate situation. And then, of course, some clergy just chose not to retire at all and stayed in the pulpit way past the time that they were effective, simply to avoid the uncertainty of retirement. And there were various charitable efforts made at that time to try to raise money and dole it out to the people who were most needy, but none of those were really consistent or predictable. So Bishop Lawrence of Massachusetts came up with the idea, and he was from a very wealthy, prominent family, and came up with the idea that there needed to be a mandatory pension system for clergy, something that they could rely upon, and something that would not require each clergy person to individually negotiate with their parish to have retirement benefits. So General Convention approved the concept, and Bishop Lawrence started a campaign to raise money to seed the pension fund. And he drew upon some of his wealthy friends, including J.P. Morgan and some other financiers who were very devout Episcopalians, and those people gave money, but really it was a fraction of the $8.5 million that was raised to start the pension fund. There were over 40,000 donors across the church who joined in this effort, and so over the years we've expanded our mission at the request of General Convention to include retirement benefits for lay employees, to include medical benefits for clergy and lay, property and casualty, publishing, etc. And It's been a real steady as you go, focus on the mission and being very disciplined through the years, and I think has been very successful. So kudos to Bishop Lawrence for his audacious vision of having this support and this security blanket for clergy and now for lay employees of the church as well.
You know, clearly CPG has a rich history, but it seems to also be responding to changing times and circumstances. And I know you often get, you kind of do a strategic planning or setting your priorities in between general conventions. Can you maybe update us on some of the strategic issues you've been focusing on in all your multiple businesses over the last 4 years, I guess it is?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, we're very focused on strategic planning, and we start with what is our purpose? And some people would call that our mission, but our purpose is to serve the clergy and lay employees of the Episcopal Church in their calling to spread the gospel. So that's our most aspirational reason to exist. Our long-term vision, knowing that our central purpose is benefits, and particularly retirement benefits, our long-term vision is to make sure that we can provide the highest level of financial security and retirement to our clergy and lay employees as is possible in a way that's financially sustainable by us, but also in a way that is attuned to the evolving needs of the church, not just operating in a ivory tower. So that's our long-term vision, 10, 15 years out. So every year, every 3 years, we go through a planning cycle and set forth a strategic plan for 3 years. And then we break it down into, if we're going to do this in 3 years, what are we going to do in kind of 1 year segments? And since the last General Convention, we've been focused on a number of different areas. First of all, focusing on our property and casualty and publishing businesses. We have new leaders for each business. Chris Rourke, who's leading our property and casualty business, and he's been very focused on climate change and the fact that we are getting increasingly larger and more frequent storms. And of course, the Episcopal Church is clustered in areas that are very hurricane prone. So of course, that's a significant concern for the property and casualty business. So he's been looking at how do we make sure that we have a robust reinsurance program, i.e. the insurers who insure us. How do we make sure the churches are well informed about upkeep and what they need to do to de-risk their properties? What do we need to think about in terms of the declining number of churches that we insure in the smaller insurance pool? So he has a lot of big strategic issues there. Unfortunately, he's passionate about the mission of church insurance and CPG overall, and also comes from decades of experience in the insurance business. So we're very fortunate to have his new leadership of that business. And then we have RDA Stewart, who is our new publisher and head of our publishing business, Church Publishing. And she too is focused on, the declining Episcopal population. So how do we have a sustainable publisher for the church? She's looking at expanding into global markets and has already done so. She's looking at efficiency measures such as contracting just recently with a new distributor for our products, and very focused on what it takes to have a very sustainable, financially sustainable publisher for the Episcopal Church. So those are in our two ancillary businesses. When it comes to the benefits business, one big initiative over the past few years has been moving to a Medicare Advantage, group Medicare Advantage plan for our retirees. We self-insured our retiree medical plan for clergy. And after years of watching what's going on in the Medicare space, we've been able to move to a much more robust and less expensive option for our retirees. And that took years of planning with management and the board together to roll that out, which we successfully did at the beginning of this year. We've been looking at our life insurance business as well and realized that this business, which is very small and has been part of our portfolio for a long time, is too small to offer the best possible options in the market. So we've been looking at and transitioning to various outsourcing models for that business, where we keep the relationships and really enable the business to benefit from our knowledge of the Episcopal Church, but leverage the much larger life insurance businesses and products that are out there in the market. So those are just some examples of what we've been looking at over the past 4 years and in the core business.
I loved your comments about, the early philanthropists kind of providing the seed money for the CPG fund, kind of very forward-thinking Episcopalians. But obviously, over the last 100+ years, there's been a lot of upheaval. There have been wars and depressions, and it seems as though CPG has never skipped a beat in terms of providing benefits. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of the history of the portfolio and your general investment philosophy, both historically and going forward?
Sure. Well, we have been, I want to say very fortunate, but I think we've had the blessing of wonderful leadership and a wonderful board through the decades since the pension fund was established. It was established with management who were very professionally focused and combined our core values of professionalism, compassion, and trustworthiness. And that's been a constant over the decades of the pension fund. I'd also say that the board has really been focused on its fiduciary responsibility to the participants of the fund. And just a side note there, we're a New York incorporated corporation. We're subject to the scrutiny of the New York State insurance regulators. And we have a board that is, we have 25 board members. I'm the 25th. I'm appointed by the other board members, but the other 24 are elected by the church. And the board has the responsibility of oversight to make sure that management is doing its job. And we have board members who come from across the professional spectrum, from investment expertise to accounting and law, and of course, various representatives of clergy and leaders in the church. So that board membership and board representation has been very important through the decades in our success, but also the professional management of the portfolio. For many years, for many decades, when the portfolio was smaller, we outsourced the management of it to JP Morgan. And in more recent decades, when the portfolio was growing, we brought in an internal investment staff. So now we have some of the best people right on site in our investment team, almost, I guess, around 35 people at this point, including an office in Hong Kong, where the responsibility is to survey the opportunities throughout the Asia Pacific region. And I think some of the reasons we've been successful is that we're very focused on our mission. We do not stray from our mission. We're not legally entitled to stray from our mission. And we're very focused on that, doing what we do best. So we've been very long-term focused in terms of our investments. We have a very diversified portfolio across asset classes, everything from venture capital and private equity to your blue chip public company stocks to a bond portfolio and commodities. And we also invest across the world. So that diversification helps keep us stable. You know, when some assets are going down, asset classes are going down in value, others are going up. And of course, we recruit a very talented team who find this to be, I think, by and large, a wonderful place to work, and we can retain people who are really passionate about the purpose of their work.
Well, Mary Kate, you know that ECF manages endowments on behalf of Episcopal organizations and parishes and dioceses, and we're going through an incredible period of market volatility. which obviously people are concerned about. I guess the good news is it's impacting everybody. What is CPG doing to kind of handle this incredibly challenging time in the investment world?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned earlier, we've been through this many, many times. I mean, I guess most notably the Great Depression, the Great Financial Crisis just over a decade ago. And then, 2 years ago, 2020, when the markets plunged at the beginning of the pandemic. And of course, we're going through a very volatile time now. Markets are down 15 to 20%, and every day is different. I think I just read that this first 6 months of the year are the worst in many decades, since the 70s, I believe. So part of our strategy is steady as you go. We invest with a long-term focus. And I like to say to people, when we think about long-term, and when I think about long-term, I think about somebody who's being ordained now at the age of 28 or 30 and thinking, this individual is going to be looking to us for security for the next 70 years, realistically could live to 100. And we have to be here to provide security and consistency for that individual. So that means we have to invest with a very long-term focus. So we do not react to day-to-day changes in the financial markets. We have tweaked the portfolio a little bit in recent years to de-risk it a bit. But generally, we are thinking long-term and planning that there is going to be significant volatility in the markets. And how do we plan for that? Part of what we do is stress test the portfolio. So every year, we, with outside consultants, run 10,000 different possibilities of events in the financial markets, of inflation, and look at the probability that the amount of money that we have in the pension fund right now, the clergy pension fund, and we did the same exercise with the lay defined benefit plan. Do we have enough money and enough of a cushion now to withstand that disruption and those challenges in the financial markets going forward? And we also do a similar stress testing to look at liquidity. Do we have enough liquid assets in the portfolio such that even if there's tremendous upheaval in the financial markets, we're still going to be able to get pension funds and medical payments and such out in a timely fashion to people? And fortunately, from the clergy plan perspective, we look very strong. We're in, I would say, a cautious position in that we don't think we have a sufficient cushion to really dramatically enhance benefits or reduce the inflows into the pension fund without rethinking benefits. But we feel comfortable that the promises we've made now we can sustain. When it comes to the lay plan, as you know, Donald, in 2009, General Convention mandated that churches pay benefits to lay employees of the church and gave a choice to either pay benefits in a defined contribution plan, 401k, 403b, or a defined benefit plan like the clergy plan. And we have a few thousand retirees in our defined benefit plan, but by and large, the bulk, at least 90% of our active employees are in defined contribution plans. The defined benefit plan, which has about 3,000 or 4,000 retired lay employees now, is not nearly as well funded as the clergy plan. And the reasons for that are multiple. Number one, the church only pays in 9% for benefits for lay as opposed to the 18% for clergy. But even more importantly, the lay plan has only been around for a few decades as opposed to over a century for the clergy plan. So we haven't had the same time to build that cushion. So that means we're not in a position right now to pay COLAs or enhance benefits, but we do feel very comfortable that we can sustain the promises that we've already made for that lay population. But anyway, those are the stress testing tools are just two ways that we, both the liquidity tool and the overall stress testing are just two tools that we use to test our comfort level.
So we can assure David, my pre-son who turns 37 in August, that he will have a pension when he retires in 40 or 50 years, whatever.
I know David well, and I could not look him in the face if I didn't think that were true, Donald.
I just also want to say that ECF recently moved our 403B plan to CPG, and we've been very happy with the service and the returns. So thank you. I know we have questions, and we will get to your questions in a few moments, but I do want to get to General Convention because that is happening next week. And I know CPG prepares very thorough analytical reports right before General Convention. Some of that is mandated by General Convention. Some of that is just your wonderful kind of best practices and transparency. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the reports that you have submitted and highlight that briefly? Because I know we also have time limits here, but.
Sure. Well, first of all, I have to say we're just so sad not to be at General Convention. So obviously a very responsible decision that was made to keep people safe, but we're sorry we're not going to be seeing people there. So we're happy to have this and other ways to connect virtually. So but we'd love to be there. And I welcome this opportunity to talk about some of the things we've done since the last General Convention. We have had a lot of reports and such that were requested of us at the last General Convention, and have appreciated the opportunity to put those together. There are two reports that have to do with parity of benefits, and I just touched on that with the comparison of lay benefits and clergy benefits. We were asked to do a report that was specifically focused on lay as compared to clergy, and we actually produced that report now almost 2 years ago and presented that to Executive Council. It's available on our website, and I think a link to the Blue Book. We also are just issuing our report, another report that looks at equity and benefits across the spectrum, not just lay and clergy, though it includes that, but differences based on gender, ethnicity, race, domestic as compared to non-domestic. And that's a very robust report, a lot of data for people to digest, but also we wanted to make sure that there was real flesh and bones behind the data. So I personally conducted across the country and then resorted to virtually, of course, dozens of listening events in the last several years to hear from different demographics of clergy. So some of the findings there, although anecdotal, not scientific, but some of the findings from those conversations are also in the report. And I must say, although anecdotal, the what we heard in these meetings largely supported the data that we presented. We were asked by General Convention to collect racial and ethnic data and sexual preference data. That was data that we did not collect in the past because we really only collected information that was necessary actuarially to determine pensions and benefits. But we were asked by the church to take that on to help the church look at equity across the church. So we have made a concerted effort to get people to volunteer information on race and ethnicity in particular. And there are reports on that as well. The 2015 General Convention asked us to do a report on non-domestic benefits, and we presented that report at the 2018 General Convention. And then in the last 4 years have implemented a number of changes for non-domestic clergy that were where the needs were revealed in that report that we had provided. And then SRI, we were asked to join CCSR to lobby companies to introduce climate specialists to their boards. So that's been a collaborative effort over the past several years. And we also presented a sustainability report about our portfolio and our efforts in socially responsible investment, which again are part of our report to General Convention and were included in our Blue Book. And finally, the other area I want to mention is paid family leave. We were asked to work with committees of the church to look at possibilities for paid family leave. So we were delighted to lend our expertise to that endeavor, and a report was produced by that group as well. And we were very, very happy to be made a part of that effort.
Actually, Mary Kate, there are a couple questions that are good follow-ups to what you mentioned. We have one question about a woman priest ordained in early 1977, wondering whether there is any talk about supplementing the pensions of those early women ordinands. If you could speak a little more about priests outside of, you mentioned non-domestic clergy, say a little more about that. And then the whole issue of paying pensions on the basis of years of service, notwithstanding your compensation levels, or whether you're serving a more resourced congregation versus a less resourced. There are more, but
Sure. Let me
throw
touch
that at
on
you right now.
Let me touch on those. With regard to the woman who was ordained in 1977, our pension fund is skewed to provide disproportionately higher benefits to lesser paid clergy. So there's some flat dollar amount elements of our formula that actually provide a little bit higher benefit to those at the lower income levels. And we look at that vis-a-vis our policy every few, I think 3 to 5 years, and we're due to be looking at that again. So we benchmark that against inflation and other factors. So we'll be revisiting that and seeing if there's a possibility of raising those limits so that we provide more. But do know that those at lower income levels actually get a higher income replacement value than those at the higher income levels. In terms of non-domestic clergy, some of the things that we did in the last few years for non-domestic clergy, first of all, let me say with non-domestic clergy, our pension benefits are actually very robust in that for clergy who've served for 20 years or more, those clergy typically get at least equal to what they were paid when they were active, if not more than what they were paid when they were active. So that's a very unusual feature and very different from the domestic clergy plan where people only get a fraction of what they were making while they were active. But that being said, because pensions are based on compensation, salaries and compensation can be very low in some of the non-domestic dioceses. So even though the pension may be equal to more than what somebody was making when they were active, it can still be a very low absolute number. So some of the things that we've done in response to the study, as what we discovered in the study that we produced after the 2015 General Convention, was we increased the medical benefit for non-domestic clergy. We have covered banking fees. We discovered that in many places, people's pension payments were reduced by banking fees that were automatically withdrawn. And we've also indexed to cover local inflation and buying power. So I think those are some pretty important changes that we made. And we continue to look at those plans to see what we can do that's financially viable within the scope of those plans. And then I think the other one was why do we use a compensation-based system as opposed to just looking at years of credited service? So our pension formula for both domestic and non-domestic clergy and for lay employees in the defined benefit plan is to look at a formula that takes into account both compensation and years of credited service. And that is the kind of typical way that pensions are calculated in the world, or at least in the United States. And the philosophy behind that is to try to, by taking into account compensation levels, to try to help people continue approximately the same lifestyle that they had while they were working into retirement. And then, of course, the idea of credited service, the more years you work, the more you're paying in, and therefore we can enhance your pension benefit. And from time to time, there are questions about, well, shouldn't we have a flat pension across the church? The Church of England has something like that, though that's how it's sold. Doesn't really quite work that way from what we understand when you look behind it, but more of a flat pension system. And I have to say that is something that would be a very, very major change in our approach. And although we have some flexibility in changing formulas and such, this is not something we would do. This is not a change that we would make without a very strong signal from General Convention that that was the overall desire of the direction we should take from the church. But it's certainly something that there's been conversation about, time and again, as to whether this is the right system for our church. And as the fund, we're here to administer whatever plan the church really wants us to administer. So we're to some extent, I'd say, agnostic in that regard, but we would need a strong signal from the church to change direction.
Got some questions about the 18% assessment, if you will. First of all, does that support the other businesses, or what is that 18% used for? How long has it been in place, and are there any conversations about changing that going forward?
Oh, sure. Yeah, another popular topic of conversation. The 18% has been in place since about the 1970s. It gradually increased over time to enable the fund to pay kind of living pensions or living wage type pensions to retirees. And what's covered by the pension fund is it covers, there's a life benefit, there's retiree medical, there's disability, there's a Christmas bonus, there's a resettlement benefit, and then your standard pension. So there are a number of things that are covered by the 18% that would not be kind of in your standard pension fund, but that would have to be separately purchased. So it's kind of a bundled, it's a bundled offering. And would we consider reducing it? Well, as I say, we've stress tested the fund every year. We had a real pop-up in value for our latest valuation, which was March 1st. But as you all know, the markets have been not very cooperative the last few months. So there's been a drop even since our from the level that our annual report would show. And right now we think we have the 18% is provides the right level of assets. If we were asked by the church to reduce that amount, then we'd analyze it. We'd say, can we support with a reduced amount? Can we support the level of benefits that we're actually paying? We just have to go through that exercise. But if the church said they can only afford, 15 or 12 or 9 or whatever, we'd have to go through a very, a very careful study to say, okay, if that's what's going to come into the fund, what can we actually afford to pay out? So again, that would be a very significant decision. And although unilaterally, we probably have the power and authority to change the assessment level, it's not something we would do without, again, close collaboration with the church.
It appears that a lot of what CPG does and how it does it is determined by General Convention. And with General Convention coming up next week, and we do have some deputies and bishops on the webinar, what are some of the resolutions or issues that you are either proposing or following going forward next week?
Yeah, well, one of the most important things for us that happens at General Convention is the election of our trustees. And at most General Conventions, we have 12 seats that are open. We usually have 6 incumbent trustees, and therefore we'll have at least 6 new trustees joining the board. And we're a very large, complex organization. So the composition of our board in terms of good governance is exceedingly important to our success. So I just ask those who are deputies and bishops at General Convention to prayerfully and carefully study the resumes and backgrounds of the people running for the pension fund board, and think about the commitment and the expertise that's necessary to serve successfully on this board. The other thing I will say,
let me just ask you before you get to, let me ask that. So what kinds of people or backgrounds or characteristics are you looking for? I mean, how, it can't be a popularity contest given the fact that there's such a significant fiduciary responsibility, literally for billions of dollars, not only in assets, but future liability. And for those of you who probably can guess, New York state law is very specific on fiduciary responsibilities of organizations like CPG. So what are you looking for? I mean, not in terms of individuals, but backgrounds, skill sets.
Thank you for asking that, Donald. And I have to say, we never seem to have enough people with investment background, with accounting background, with insurance background. So some very specific areas of expertise that are, very, very relevant to what we do. We always have kind of a few in those categories, but we could use more people with those backgrounds as well. We have been fortunate to have a number of lawyers, and their kind of broad view of fiduciary responsibility and such has been helpful. We also we don't tend to get a lot of people who are involved in the pension business per se. So hanging on to the people who have those areas of expertise and finding other people in those categories would be very helpful. And of course, bishops and clergy bring, a unique and necessary perspective as well. So one thing I would like to say, though, and we say this every general convention, but it's very useful to the pension fund to have our incumbent trustees reelected, because this is a very complicated organization. I find that sometimes people are just hitting their stride after their first 6-year term, and we really get a lot more benefit from their second 6-year term. And in fact, one of my trustees who's retiring said, the first 3 years I listened, the second 3 years I asked questions, and my next term I added value. So I think everybody adds value from the day they step onto the board, but certainly the more knowledge and expertise and experience with us, the better. So we're always delighted when we see our incumbents return and be able to leverage that first 6 years of experience. And in this case, it'll be 7 years, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, clearly deputies and bishops have a incredible responsibility. I mean, all the elections are important, but this has significant implications for the future of the church. So thank you.
Yeah.
What else is
and
going
the Holy Spirit has supported us in these
the Holy
elections.
Spirit
We've always
too.
had marvelous trustees,
Yes.
so we've been very, very fortunate.
But the Holy Spirit doesn't push the button to vote for the people. So, so what else? Obviously, elections are important, and especially given the fact that it's a more abbreviated convention this year. What else is going on?
I have to say, I've seen, I've been sitting in on a lot of committee meetings, as have my colleagues, and I'm so impressed with the work that has been done. And it actually seems that a lot of the resolutions that directly impact the pension fund have been resolved one way or the other, or, on a consent calendar, or perhaps still subject to debate, but so much work has been done. So some of them, I'll just highlight. One was to have require dioceses to pay deacons a minimum of $25 a month so that they might become eligible for the pension fund. Let me say that wasn't necessary to bring them into the pension fund. Some dioceses already pay their deacons, and if they pay them and they otherwise meet our eligibility criteria, then they're eligible for the fund. But we're certainly delighted that that there's an effort to try to open up the possibility for more people to legitimately join the fund. So to pay deacons and enable them to be part of our pension plan is a wonderful thing. They also have to satisfy criteria that show that demonstrate that they're actual employees, but that's a detail that we'll work through with the various dioceses when the time comes. So that's one. Another one was that there were a number of resolutions to do with the denominational health plan, and where that ended up was a requirement that there be a task force with representatives across the church to study the denominational health plan and see if there are ways to improve it, or if it's the best plan for the church. And we were really heartened to see that, because I think it's very difficult in just hearings at General Convention, and given the pace of General Convention and such, to study something as complicated as the denominational health plan. And we're really pleased that we think we have delivered on the mandate that the church gave us with the denominational health plan. But healthcare is expensive. So whether it's just educating people through the task force or coming up with ways to tweak it. So for instance, one thing that came up, and the denominational health plan was instituted in 2009. And so it's been maturing. And in 2012, we were asked by the church to move all the dioceses towards a more uniform rate, not one rate across the church, but really get them kind of very close to an average rate. And of course, they're going to be, we've done that, but they're going to be winners and losers in that game. So dioceses where rates were very high, they'd see their rates come down as a result of an average, but the only way to bring them down was to bring other dioceses whose local markets were quite low to bring them up. So, they're losers in terms of the price of healthcare. And so that's probably something that they're going to want to look at, was the intended consequence really what was being, or was the consequence really what was intended? So a number of issues with the denominational health plan, and we really look forward to working over the next couple of years with that task force. There was also a resolution urging us to provide 12 weeks of maternity leave for lay employees. There's a 12-week maternity leave provision in the clergy pension plan that is a benefit of the pension plan. And we have a separate short-term disability plan for lay employees. So we will look to provide that. It is going to mean increased cost up to 20% across the board for lay disability, but we will do our best to honor that and see what's available and try to provide that. We've also been asked in the SRI area to update our sustainability report, which we look forward to do, to keep in mind that the church is very interested in clean energy, and that's a passion of ours too. So we're very thrilled to comply with and follow those requests as well. So by and large, I think through these committees, it's just been a really kind of wonderful sensitivity to kind of our mission and what we can and cannot do. And I look forward to following through on, assuming these resolutions are all passed at General Convention, we look forward to following through and working with the church over the next couple of years on to the 81st General Convention.
Got a question about the other entities, church publishing and church insurance, and whether or not those are sustainable businesses and part of the underlying core mission of CPG to provide benefits to clergy and lay employees. I mean, can you comment on that in terms of your kind of strategic direction over the next several years?
Sure. Well, they're not our core businesses, and they're somewhat of an historical anachronism, I guess, or whatever. The publishing business was given to us in the form of Church Hymnal Corporation in 1918, 1 year after we were founded. And it was thought at the time that that would be a cash cow for the pension fund. And of course, for many years it was. In more recent years, when the publishing industry has been very challenged and we're a very small player, it's been a very difficult financial model for us. So we feel that that business was entrusted to us by the church, and we're doing our best to make it into a profitable, self-sustaining business. Over the past, it doesn't take a lot of investment from the pension fund, but we do want this to be a profitable company. And as I said, we have a new publisher, RDA Stewart, who I think is just going to be gangbusters and is already doing a lot to grow the top line and also control expenses. So I think we're going to be seeing a renaissance of that particular business. But we do know that business provides a substantial service to the church in terms of publishing liturgical materials and various things that come out of documents and such that come out of general conventions. So we feel that there's a reliance factor there that we want to honor, as long as we can do that in a sustainable fashion and make sure that that church publishing is an appropriate investment for the pension fund. It's really an asset of the fund. In terms of church insurance, that was also started outside of the pension fund as church fire insurance company back in the 30s and 40s. And people who ran that business actually happened to be trustees of the pension fund and thought, wouldn't it be cool if we put everything under one roof? So kind of strange to have a property and casualty business under a pension fund, but it's been part of our fabric since the 30s and 40s, when pieces of it were given to us, and ultimately we owned 100%. That business has been financially sustainable in recent years. It went through kind of a bad patch a decade and a half ago, but it is on very sound footing now. I mentioned Chris Rourke, our new leader of that business, and he and his team are very focused on making sure that that is sustainable and on a standalone basis. So I have a lot of confidence in that team to ensure that it will be there to serve the church in its unique way.
What keeps you up at night?
Well,
what keeps any of us up at night?
Let me turn the tables for a minute.
Okay,
Donald, you've been asking me all these questions. What about you? What's going on with Episcopal Church Foundation? What's keeping you up at night?
Yeah, it's been challenging times. Like all of us, we've pivoted to kind of online resources. We have a very robust Vital Practices website. I mentioned we had over 200,000 views in 2021. A lot of our congregational leadership initiative is pivoting to an online resource. We have various resource hubs that we're curating during these challenging times. And we're also, as you know, we're really, our pension, our endowment management program. We have a robust staff who is there to work with clients to keep them connected, to make sure that they know what's going on during these challenging times in the investment world. But we're also kind of trying to figure out what is the role of an organization like ECF in a changing church and world, where at least by traditional indications, the church is in decline. And we're coming to the fact that we want to help Episcopal faith communities kind of reimagine the use of their missional assets, and whether that's money, buildings, people, community connections. And I think, we all need to kind of be in touch with people. These are stressful times and people feel isolated and disconnected. And whether it's through webinars like this or websites or even good old fashioned in-person meetings, I think we all need to connect with each other in order to be the body of Christ that we're called to be. So thank you, Mary Kate. We appreciate the partnership with other organizations, with CPG and others, because together we're here to support our beloved Episcopal Church during these changing circumstances. So
yeah, and I think you and we both look for intersections where we can both bring, what we do best to the table and partner. We did that for programs for seminarians in recent years,
right?
And various other kind of groups. And it's there's a lot that we can do together, and we're thankful for those opportunities.
So what does keep you up at night?
Well, inflation, stagnation, recession. So, our biggest risk, and we go through an enterprise risk assessment semi-annually, and where we pool all the risks, kind of a bottoms up, ask everybody in the company, what are the things that are keeping you up at night? Those float up, and then my executive team and I look at it from a top-down approach and say, what are the things that we need to kind of keep in front of the board? What are the things that we really need to stay up at night worrying about? And definitely the possibility that the portfolio might not perform in a way that we can provide the benefits that we provide. But as I mentioned in kind of earlier comments, we do a lot to mitigate that risk. So right now we're very, very comfortable, but we're the sort of things that really concern us on the investment side, the fact that there may be inflation and a sluggish or difficult economy and stagflation. Those are the things that really could have a very negative impact on the portfolio. And we're seeing, potential signs of those. I mean, certainly high inflation, but concerns along those lines now. So we're very happy that we have a strategy that takes into account those risks, and we continue to follow that strategy. So that's one of the things. I mean, obviously the declining church. And I think somebody asked a question about how do we think about the decline in the church, the closing of small churches and such. And when we do this stress testing of the portfolio, what do we need to do to kind of be here for decades to come for David Romanik and others of his cohorts? We think about, we model different sizes of the church. We think, what's it going to look like if we just kind of stay level? I mean, right now, that's kind of a best case perhaps scenario, but we also look at declining numbers of clergy and lay employees. And are we in a good financial position to actually to serve them no matter what happens with the size of the church? And actually, from the clergy plan perspective, this is a little known fact, but we bring in about 80 or $90 million of assessments a year. We pay out close to $400 million in benefits. And so we pay out way more than comes in through assessments. And so clergy who come into the plan end up taking more out of the plan than they bring in, even that amount invested at a kind of modest level. And so we know that we need this cushion of assets to be able to fill that gap. But the other thing is, because clergy take out more than they bring in, actually, the more clergy who come in, theoretically, the worse off the pension fund is. So a declining population is actually financially better, but we want to serve a thriving church. So we are prepared to support base level of clergy, increasing number of clergy. We're there to do our best to help the church thrive, and hopefully people knowing that they will have secure retirements will help more people feel that they can take that commitment to have a career in the church.
I think the good news is, and the lesson for all of us is that, CPG is a large, complex organization. It has resources, it has staff, but we all need to engage in thoughtful, prayerful processes to figure out what God is calling us to do in the next year, 5 years, decades ahead. And obviously, from a CPG point of view, it involves actuarial analysis and stress testing. But if we're not moving forward, we're falling behind. And God is calling us to be an active force for good in this broken world. And the Episcopal Church may look very different in the years ahead, but it still has a compelling message to the world. And I think we're all fortunate to have organizations like CPG, and I think ECF
absolutely
can help support us during these times of challenge, but also opportunity.
Well, I think, Donald, you and I both consider ourselves privileged to be able to lead these organizations, because we both believe in the Episcopal Church and a thriving church, and that we're here to do God's work in the world. And it's an honor to be able to lead organizations that can be so impactful and have such a positive impact on the church going forward.
Thank you. And for those of you who are deputies or have an official role at General Convention, we wish you luck. Have a safe, productive, spirit-filled meeting. You go with our blessings and our prayers and our good wishes. And we wish we can be with you, but we will be there in spirit. And I just want to thank you all. I don't know if I have any final questions here, but I think we're coming to the end of our time together. Are there any other final thoughts or comments from the organizers of this wonderful webinar?
Well, I want to say thank goodness for live streaming, because we're disappointed not to be there, but at least we can watch from afar, which will be great. Anyway, I'd like to say, for those who are deputies or bishops or whatever, if there's any way that we can add information or insight or whatever that is helpful in your work during the course of General Convention, we have many people on standby to be able to pitch in and help if there's a need for information that we might possess or background or whatever. We stand ready to assist from far. And Donald, I want to thank you for this opportunity.
Well, thank you.
It's great to see you, albeit virtually. And
yeah,
so
we're going
nice
to have to connect in person. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
And thank you, Jermaine and Kurt and Kirsten and everyone who put this together. Thank you all for participating. This is a busy time, but this was an important conversation, and we will continue to have webinars and ways of connecting with all of you as you navigate this brave new world of the Episcopal Church. So blessings, God bless you all, and we hope to see you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Best wishes for General Convention.